Shepard was asking for it for three.
Well, he felt it, didn't he? He was begging.
Oh, what a play by Matt Mitchell.
To Watson, sees a lane, takes it underneath. Montana three.
This is a clinic. This is Aztec basketball.
Aztec Nation, what is up? This is the Aztec Breakdown Podcast. I'm your host today. My name is Tron. Before we get into all the fun stuff, let's get the obligatory stuff out of the way. So make sure to follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever. Like, follow, subscribe, comment, whatever the options are on your preferred listening platform of choice. You can find myself on social media, primarily at Blue Sky, but other places such as YouTube or TikTok as well, at Aztec Breakdown. You can find the other contributors to the show primarily on Twitter, but also all of them are also on Blue Sky. You can find Kyle at Call Me Kinslow. You can find Austin at It's Austin Bolton. You can find Carly at Car McGee, and you can find Jacob at Aztec Analytics. And with that out of the way, let's get into the last few games. First off, we have the Utah State game, and the Aztecs lost to Utah State 79-71. I don't think that was a huge surprise necessarily. It was definitely, Utah State's definitely a team the Aztecs can beat. And I think despite losing to them twice, they've shown that. They've shown that they can beat Utah State, which is weird to say after getting swept. But both games were pretty close. This game was closer than the final score indicates, I would even say. The Aztecs had a 4-point lead with about 4 minutes left. And so they were leading deep in the game, and that was after being down by as much as 14 in the first half. So they kind of swarmed back and were able to take a lead late in the game, and then they just weren't able to score really after that until the very end, and ended up losing by 8. More consequential though than the loss was the loss of Magoon Gwath. Gwath played only a minute or two and then went down with an injury. We later found out it was a hyperextended knee, and so that's just basically when your knee bends too far the wrong direction. Never a good thing to have happen. It did give shades of Matt Mitchell, who also hyperextended his knee at Utah State, of all places. I'm just now realizing this. I don't remember off the top of my head how long Matt Mitchell missed, but it was definitely a chunk of time. Hopefully, the Aztecs can get Magoon Gwath back before too long. But with these types of injuries, especially with big guys, you just never really know. It would be nice to have him before the conference tournament, if only to knock some rust off, I guess, after not really playing for a week or two. If you get him back by the conference tournament, then great. If they being the Aztecs, if they're lucky enough to make the tournament, the big tournament, without Gwath, and you get him back for that would be fantastic. It would seem to me that him missing out on the big dance, if provided the Aztecs make the field, that would seem to be pretty unlikely. I based on my 0 minutes of medical experience and training, that would seem pretty unlikely to me that he would miss that much time. But hopefully he can come back much sooner, because he was killing it. I talked about that in the last pod, how great he was doing over the last stretch of games, and so missing him hurts, especially when in a game like at Utah State where they fight back and they take a 4-point lead with 4 minutes left. Who knows to what extent Gwath might have been helpful in retaining that lead in the very end there. So that's the number one, I think, storyline heading out of that game. A couple other things to point out. So Nick Boyd continued. He has been on a tear basically since the halftime against San Jose State, where Wayne McKinney kind of got into him and said, you're the leader, be aggressive, whatever it was that he said. Since then, Nick Boyd has been killing it. He had 15 points on 11 shots. So that's pretty solid efficiency. Up at Utah State, he also had 6 assists. He did have 3 turnovers, which isn't fantastic, but it's still a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. And so I think you take that more often than not. 2-to-1 is fine. And BJ Davis has quietly kind of starting to be coming back, maybe, which is fantastic. If the Aztecs can get him playing the way he was for the first few games of the season, that will help out the offense a lot. BJ Davis scored 14 points on 8 shots. That's fantastic efficiency. He was 4 of 7 from behind the arc against Utah State, which was great. He also chipped in 5 rebounds. He did foul out of the game, unfortunately. He only played 21 minutes, but 14 points in 21 minutes is solid. And I mean, we could get into the fouls and whatever, but we're not going to worry about that too much. It's just part of the game. But so Nick Boyd and BJ Davis both playing very, very solid up at Utah State. Miles Bird still isn't quite back yet. He had 8 points on 12 shots, not what you want to see. So if the Aztecs ever get Bird back, they will be in fantastic shape with the way Boyd has been playing. But I think that pretty much does it for Utah State. The big storyline being the Magoon-Guath injury, and hopefully he can come back soon. Moving on to the more fun game was the game at home against New Mexico, where the Aztecs win 73-65. They took the lead. They were down by 3 with roughly 8 minutes left in the game, and then they took the lead and never gave it up, leading by as much as 12 at one point in the game, and winning by 8. Very solid win. Quad 2 win. I don't know how much a quad 2 win helps in terms of this late in the season. Like, how much of a buffer does it give? And we can talk about that a little bit later. It definitely doesn't hurt. It definitely helps some, but like, does it help enough to bump you up a seed line this late? I don't think so. Bump you up a spot, maybe 2 spots, right? So you're the last 11 seed, and now you're the second 11 seed, something like that, right? I could very much see that, but I don't think the Aztecs are out of the woods yet in terms of making the field. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but it was a very good game, very fun game to watch, at the very least for Aztecs fans. The way they were able to take the lead, the way they were able to hold the lead, right? They didn't need like a furious second half comeback the way they have so many times this season. That was very encouraging. New Mexico was a very good team. They're first, I guess now they're tied for first no, they're not. I don't remember. I'll look at them in a second. There's a reason they're first in the conference, right? Donovan Dent is a big reason for that. Nelly Jr. Joseph is a big reason for that, but ultimately they're a good team, just legitimately. And so to have a good dominating win such as the one the Aztecs had was very encouraging. Once again, we need to shout out Nick Boyd, who against New Mexico had 17 points. And what makes that even more impressive was that he was largely being guarded by True Washington, who is one of the better defenders in the conference. He is arguably the most disruptive defender in the conference. Just meaning that he might not necessarily like prevent the most points in the boring like contest a shot way, which can sometimes be the best defense, but he gets into guys, he messes up their rhythm, and he gets a lot of steals, right? True Washington is fantastic at that. He even had 4 steals against the Aztecs. That's what he does. He's a great defender. And Nick Boyd still scored 17 points on 13 shots. Boyd still had, once again, 6 assists, 3 turnovers. So once again, another 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. Also contributed 7 rebounds. So Nick Boyd was just on fire like he has been for a while. Just very, very encouraging performance to see from Boyd. The other storyline that I mentioned earlier, BJ Davis. Now, BJ didn't have as flashy of a game. He did play some very solid defense against Donovan Dent. He wasn't the only person guarding Dent, and Dent still did get 26 points and did so on 20 shots. So, like, moderately efficient. Not fantastically efficient, but moderately efficient. But Dent's going to do that regardless, right? And Davis, I thought, played some pretty solid defense on Dent. And he also went 2 for 2 from the field. Both of them were behind the arc, so he got 6 points on 2 shots, which is extremely low volume, but fantastic efficiency. So hopefully just more confidence building for Davis to get him back into a rhythm. And then the big storyline was with Guath out, who replaces him in the starting lineup. It honestly could have gone a number of different ways. I was thinking about it before the game. I was like, it could be Compton, although that would probably be my least favorite choice. It could be DeGorville if they want to go small. I would have probably gone with Heidi and just moved JCJ into the kind of floor spacing big man role that Guath had. And that's ultimately what they did. And it worked out. JCJ had 12 points. Heidi had 10 points. Compton, to his credit, had 8 points. And so a lot of production from the big man combining for 30 points. And that's fantastic. So that was great. Shout out to all of them. Hopefully they can keep that up. Miles Bird did have 13 points. He had a little bit of a bounce back game. I was just mentioning the Utah State game wasn't great for him. He had 13 points on 9 shots. So solid. He did get a couple points off of a flagrant foul committed by Cade Dotson when the Aztecs were kind of taking control of the game. And so a couple free points there, kind of like an unforced error, but also in a way, and I want to shout this out, in a way kind of a forced error, because it was very much, at least it seemed to me to be very much a frustration foul by Cade Dotson, where they were in the game, and it seemed like the game was slipping away from them very quickly. And it happened when Donovan Dent picked up his second foul. He kind of had a foul he probably didn't need to commit, probably in most cases wouldn't commit, against Heidi, where Heidi was cutting from the corner, and I think it was JCJ hit him on a pass, and Heidi went up to dunk it. And I think Dent got some of the ball, but also got hand or whatever, committed the foul, and to his credit, did save those 2 points, if I remember correctly, but picked up his first foul, and then later picked up like a blocking foul against Boyd, I think it was, and that was the second foul, and there was, I think, 7 minutes left in the first half, and I was like, the Aztecs really need to pile it on for 7 minutes while Dent is sitting, and they piled it on for like a minute while Dent was sitting, and that's when they took that big lead. They got up to 9, it looks like. They took a big lead. They got up to a 9-point lead, and they sent Dent back into the game. And that was at the point of that flagrant foul where Cade Dotson, the freshman point guard, who by all accounts should be pretty good over the course of his career, but early as a freshman still has a lot to learn probably. They send Dent back in, and this is like my one complaint of the New Mexico game. Was for the most part, they did a little bit of offense-defense with Dent, but for the most part, from roughly the 6-minute mark to the end of the half, Dent was in the game. Towards the end of the half, they pulled him off a couple times, like I said, offense-defense type switches, where if the Lobos were on defense after a free throw or something, they would pull Dent off, which makes perfect sense to protect that third foul. But Dent played 38 minutes, and he played the whole second half, so he missed 2 minutes in the first half, and it was during that time. The Aztecs never went at him. I was thinking, like, go at Dent, try and see. And to their credit, he doesn't commit a lot of fouls. He commits less than 2 fouls per 40 minutes. But still, I was thinking, go at him, because the odds of him, like, if you draw a foul, fantastic. Now he has 3, and that's you're looking in great shape, because they're going to really need to pull him out at that point, right? Or what also might happen is he might have to like pull back a little bit on defense, because he is a very good defender. I think he's a very underrated defender, but he might have to pull back a little bit in order to not get that third foul. We see that with big men all the time, where like they want to go up for the block or the contest, and they don't at the last second to try and protect their last foul or whatever the case might be. And so I was hoping to do a little bit of that with Dent. And to make it even worse, he was guarding Miles Bird. And Bird is like half a foot taller than Dent. And so I was just the whole time I was thinking, attack Dent. And they never, not once, attacked Dent after, not until the second half at the very least. So that was disappointing. It ended up not mattering. The Aztecs had a 4-point lead at the half. They won by 8. So all's well that ends well, I guess. Not too much point in crying over spilled milk, but that was like my one big time complaint about the game. Offensive rebounding was another one. New Mexico had 14 offensive rebounds. Would have liked to have seen that be better, but once again, the Aztecs won, so it's hard to complain about that too much. Overall, great win against New Mexico. I know John Schaefer was saying it's probably the biggest win of the year. Not the best, but the biggest. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but like, that doesn't mean you're wrong if you do, right? I'm definitely not the arbiter of truth in these situations. I think it's a fair thought that I just don't agree with. But regardless, a very big win, hopefully one that helps solidify a position in the tournament, because the Aztecs are still looking a little bubbly, but they're a little less bubbly with that win. So that's great. I got a little ahead of myself on the homer or hater. My hater was that tactical decision of not attacking Dent when he was in foul trouble and still on the floor, because if you pick up that third foul and there's 5 minutes left in the first half, 4 minutes left in the first half, I don't think Dent is coming out for the rest of the half, honestly. And if he does, keep attacking him and see if you can get a fourth foul in the first half. Like, there just seemed to be very slim chance of something bad going wrong there, and like the risk reward of the benefit of him either having to sit or having to play softer defense seemed to be huge to me, especially considering how quickly New Mexico fell apart in that minute that he sat out, right? He sat for that 1 minute, and the Aztecs had like a 8-0 run or something like that, minute and a half, whatever it was. They just fell apart, and that's when the frustration flagrant came in and all the stuff. You could see it in their body language. It just didn't look good. So that was my hater for the week. Granted, not my typical style of that. That's probably a very rational take, and homer hater is supposed to be an irrational take, but regardless, that's what it is. The homer might be a little more irrational. So my homer take is the way Nick Boyd has been playing over the last 5 or so games. There's an argument to be made that he's been the best point guard in the conference, not over the course of the season, but over the last 5 games. Like, if you take a snapshot of right now, Nick Boyd might be the best point guard in the conference. Let's listen to this. Over the past 5 games, Nick Boyd has been averaging 18.4 points per game, 3.6 rebounds, which isn't like elite, but is solid for a point guard, 5 assists, that's really good, 2 turnovers, so a 2.5 assist to turnover ratio, that's really good, and has had a 57.1 effective field goal percentage, which is really good. Average is considered roughly around 50, and so shooting 57 is pretty well above average. You can make the argument that that's the best point guard in the league right now. The obvious competition would be Donovan Dent, and to Dent's credit, Dent has been getting more points and more assists. The rebounds are close, but Boyd has more rebounds, but Dent has been getting more points and more assists. That being said, Dent has also had more turnovers, which is to be expected. He has a greater ball handling responsibility, but he's been getting more turnovers. I think his ratio is closer to 2-1 to Boyd's 2.5-1. And the big one was Dent, and I don't have the numbers in front of me anymore. I should have written them down. But his effective field goal percentage was much worse. I think it was like 48 or 49 or something. So right in that average range, if you want to really split hairs about it, a tick below average. And so that efficiency is worth something offensively, right? If you're scoring 22 points, but you need 22 shots to do it, is that better than somebody who's scoring 18 points, but only needs 14 shots to do it, right? Does that make sense? And those aren't the numbers specifically for Denton and Boyd, but that's just to get the point across that the efficiency is worth something. Even if you're scoring at less volume, that efficiency is worth something. So that argument could be made that Boyd is the best point guard in the league right now. And also, just to expand on that a little bit, I should say, just to be fully honest, I don't publicly like to look ahead too much. I don't think it's the best style of coverage. I like to publicly look in here. That being said, as a fan, I do I do get drawn into the hype and everything of looking ahead and thinking about the potential of the following year. And with Reese Waters announcing his return, right, which isn't breaking news at this point, it's old news at this point, but with Reese Waters announcing his return, when Boyd committed, he said like the plan was to stay for 2 years. And it's hard to imagine something that might have happened that would have made him change his mind, right? If that was his original plan, something bad would need to happen, and it's hard to imagine what that could be. And so you get Waters back, hopefully healthy, hopefully looking like he was in his first 12 or 13 games as an Aztec, or at least closer to that. And you get Boyd back the way he's playing. He'll be more comfortable in the system. He'll know his role better, right? He'll be more aggressive the whole time. That's a solid foundation. Plus, getting Guath back, which I would expect at this point, especially given that he's going to miss a couple games with injury. I would expect him to come back. Bird is the only wild card. We'll have to see if he comes back. And there's always the transfer portal. I just bring up Guath and Bird because of the NBA draft. There's always the transfer portal, but Boyd and Waters, that's a solid start. And so there is a chance that the Aztecs have the best point guard in the league next year. And the last time they did that was just, the 2020 season, where they would have been a 2 seed in the tournament at the least. A lot of people say 1 seed. Seems like it to me like it would have been a 2 seed, but I wouldn't have complained either way. So that's exciting. So that's the homer take. Nick Boyd, best point guard in the league at this current moment. Okay, I want to talk about 2 more things before we sign off. First thing is, let's talk about the big dance, the March Madness tournament. I want to preface it by saying this. I do think reasonable minds can disagree on this, and I've been talking on Blue Sky with some of you, but presumably if I've been talking to you on Blue Sky, you're listening. I've been talking with some of you on Blue Sky about the odds of getting into the tournament and what it looks like, and if there's any must-win games or not, that type of thing. And I do want to say, I hope I haven't come off as like a I'm right and you're wrong. It's very much this is what I think and this is why, but I'm very open to being wrong. And in some of these cases, I'm kind of hopeful that I'm wrong. I just haven't seen the concrete evidence that makes sense in my brain to make me fully agree with what you're saying. But it's not that I'm right. So I hope it comes across the right way and it's not condescending or some other negative word like that. It's definitely not what it's supposed to be. But with that, the Aztecs have 3 games left, right? They're playing at Wyoming, they're playing at UNLV, they're playing home against Nevada. I am of the opinion that this game at Wyoming on Saturday is a must-win game. And I could be wrong about that. This is the big disagreement. I'm of the opinion that it's a must-win game. And the reason is because if the Aztecs lose, it would be the second quad 3 loss on their resume. The Aztecs' metrics aren't fantastic. They're like good enough, but they aren't fantastic. The resume is kind of what's keeping them in the field right now. And that makes sense. My understanding from talking to bracketologists like on Twitter, I will shout out T3 Bracketology on Twitter. I haven't interacted with him in a while because I'm not on Twitter anymore, but my understanding from many of them, and especially T3, who seems to be fantastic, is that kind of the resume metrics kind of determine whether or not you're in the field, and then the quality metrics, and so that's the Ken Palm, the Torvik, stuff like that, that measure your efficiency. Those kind of determine your seeding. And so the resume metrics for the Aztecs are pretty solid. Those quality metrics, those efficiency metrics, are good enough, but they're not great, right? And so that's kind of where the Aztecs are lower in the field. Adding a quad 3 loss will be hurtful to that resume. And I was looking it up the other day, and I should have written it down. There were, I think there were only 2 teams that are currently projected to be in the field, according to Bracket Matrix, that had 2 quad 3 losses. And one of them was New Mexico. And in New Mexico's case, it was definitely the case that, like, they might not have the same quality of top-tier wins like Houston, for example. Not that they don't have any good wins, but they might not have that same quality at the very tippy top. but they just have so much more wins and so much less losses that they're able to kind of make up for their 2 quad 3 losses. And I don't remember who the second team was. I think it was Memphis is who I want to say. And it was kind of a similar deal where like they did some work in the out of conference and they hadn't lost a whole lot of games regardless. And so they were able to make up for it. And I just don't know. Granted, the Houston win is fantastic. According to Evan Mia, it's the 7th best win of any team this season. So that's a great one, and it's not just the Houston game. The Creighton game is also a big one. Sweeping Boise State is a big one. Beating Nevada on the road, that's another quad 1 win, right? So it's not just the Houston game. It's not just the Creighton game, but I don't know if the resume is strong enough to withstand a second quad 3 loss. For most teams, that seems to be like a death knell, basically. It's very rare, and I haven't gone back and looked at past years. It's just hard to track that information for past years, but it just seems, it's not very likely to make the tournament if you have more than one loss in the quads 3 or 4. Not impossible, but not very likely, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. There is an argument that they could still make it. There's a separate discussion which does matter in terms of those contexts, in terms of to what extent the conference tournament matters in that regard. Because if you pick up a couple quad 2 or quad 1 wins in the conference tournament, does that help you? And it seems like, to me, once again, from what I've understood talking to bracketologists, it seems like not really. It seems like by the time the conference tournaments start on that last weekend, things are pretty much set. And it would have to be like something really crazy to change it. And even then, it's just going to change it a little bit. And the example of that is one Mountain West fans can be familiar with because it's New Mexico. Last season, New Mexico seemed like they were probably in, but they were pretty bubbly heading into the tournament, right? Getting that 6th place finish in the Mountain West. Hard to make it into the tournament then. But then they won their first game and they won their second game, and like it was like, okay, a little bit better. Fans are starting to feel more comfortable with with the Lobos getting in. And then they won their third game, and it's like, okay, at this point they should be in, right? They've added, I don't remember who they beat on the way, but they've added all these other resume building wins, these quad 2 and quad 1 wins. I know Colorado State was one of them who also made the tournament. So like you beat another tournament quality team. By the time they were in the championship game, I was thinking that they were definitely in even if they lost. And then we found out on Selection Sunday that they wouldn't have been. If they had lost the championship game, they wouldn't have been in the tournament, and they would have been the team with, at the very least, the highest net ranking since they've started to not make the tournament, which was crazy to me. And so it kind of shows that the conference tournament performance probably doesn't have a huge impact. It's not to say it has no impact, but probably doesn't have a huge impact on what happens. And so there's that to consider as well. But I tend to be of the opinion that if the Aztecs lose at Wyoming, they're probably not going to make it, and it makes it a must-win game. I think if they lose one of like at UNLV home against Nevada, they can probably withstand that. It's a quad 2 loss. It's not ideal, obviously, but it's a quad 2 loss. I wouldn't expect that to bump you out unless there's something crazy with like bid stealers or something. The Wyoming one, I could see doing that though. All that being said, let's talk about this last week and a half of the regular season. I want to go over some of the potential scenarios and what the seeding might look like and what I think we as Aztec fans should probably be rooting for. And as with everything, I'm open to discussion on this. There was even just yesterday, Utah State was playing Boise State, and at first I was thinking that it might be better to root for Boise State. And then in talking about it with somebody on Blue Sky, I think it was like Rand Diego or something like that. I apologize if I'm completely misremembering, but I was talking with somebody on Blue Sky, and they kind of convinced me that actually I think Boise State is the team to root for, which worked out. Boise State won. So all that to say, me saying this, I could be wrong. Please, if you have a different opinion, share it. I'd love to hear it. But let's go over some of these scenarios. So the big one isn't really the big one because the odds of this happening are basically 0. But how can the Aztecs win the conference? It is mathematically, technically still possible. What it would require is for Utah State to lose at least one of their next 2 games to get a share of the conference title. And this wouldn't necessarily be for seeding. If you want the Aztecs to be the number 1 seed, Utah State has to lose both of their games. That's a requirement because they have the tiebreaker because they swept the Aztecs. And so they would have to lose both. But if you just want a share of the title, Utah State would have to lose at least 1, and New Mexico has to lose at least 2 of their next 3. And I don't think either of those are happening, honestly. I would expect Utah State to win their next 2. I would expect New Mexico to win at least 2 of their next 3. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if they won all 3 of their next 3. So that's not happening. But if you're interested, that's what it would take. As it stands right now, the Aztecs are currently tied for 4th in the conference with Boise State. New Mexico is first at 14-3. Utah State is a half game behind them at 14-4. And Colorado State is a half game behind Utah State at 13-4. And then both the Broncos and the Aztecs are at 12-5. So that's the top 5 right now. Now, the number 1 goal, maybe not the number 1 goal, but like probably the most important goal in terms of if you want to win the conference tournament. The most important goal isn't necessarily getting the number 1 seed. The most important goal is not being in the bottom, or is not being in the bottom 6 teams, right? You want to be in the top 5 because then you get that first round bye. In the 11, I think it's been 11 seasons that the Mountain West has run their tournament in the current format. 1 team from the bottom 6 has won the whole thing, and that was New Mexico last season. It's just so hard to win 4 games in 4 days, especially when basically half the teams only have to play 3 games in that same time span. It's just so hard to do, and New Mexico showed last year it's not impossible, but it's so hard to do. So you want to be in that top 5 somewhere. And to that end, right now, there is only 1 team that could possibly kick San Diego State out of that range, and that's UNLV. That's the only one, because UNLV is 9-8, so they are 3 losses behind San Diego State, which meant if UNLV wins their next 3 and San Diego State loses their next 3, then they both finish 12-8. And on top of that, because San Diego State and UNLV play each other, again, in those 3 games, UNLV would have Buku tiebreaker after sweeping San Diego State. And so they would get that tiebreaker. They would end up as 5th seed in that case, presumably, assuming Boise State wins at least 1 game, right? There's so many like contingencies and possibilities with this that it gets tricky, but that's basically the only way, right? As long as UNLV loses 1 game over their next 3, the Aztecs are guaranteed to be in the top 5. So that's fantastic, especially considering the Aztecs play UNLV. They can just ensure that it happens. So that's the good news. In terms of what we're rooting for, what I think we're rooting for, to me at least, and this is, I don't have like the game by game how it needs to happen necessarily, but what I think we're rooting for, to me, is as the Aztecs, we want to finish in 4th or 5th. It doesn't really matter. 4th would be ideal because the only way to finish in 5th at this point is for San Diego State to lose an extra game on top of what Boise State loses over the next 3. If that makes sense. That was a bit of a word salad, right? If Boise State wins all 3 and the Aztecs only win 2, then the Aztecs would finish in 5th, assuming that, the UNLV thing doesn't matter that I talked about a minute ago. Then the Aztecs finish in 5th, which is still fine, but like just win the next 3 and just call it good, right? But that being said, you're looking for 4th or 5th, ideally 4th, because it seems like with that, the most likely opponent would be Boise State. And the Aztecs have beaten Boise State twice already, once in their place, once in Viejas. And this would be in Viejas East, right? And so I very much like the Aztecs' odds there against this Boise State team. This Boise State team just doesn't seem to match up well against this Aztec team for whatever reason. It just doesn't seem like a good matchup for them. A lot of people make the point about how it's hard to beat a team 3 times in one season. And while I haven't looked into it in probably a couple seasons, when I did look into it, that was vastly overblown. It was like more than 80% of the time. Maybe it was more than 90% of the time. If a team won the first 2, they were going to win the 3rd game as well. And that was even in the case where it was 2 kind of more similar teams. Because a lot of those might be, if San Diego State beats San Jose State twice, sure, they're probably going to win the 3rd one, right? Like there's just such a talent discrepancy. But in this case, if it's like San Diego State and Boise State, that dropped it down a little bit, but it was still like 70% or something ridiculous like that. I'd have to pull up the numbers again. If anybody wants me to share them, I can. I should probably update them. But the beating a team a 3rd time thing seems to be largely overblown. It's not as big of a deal as many people say it is. So there is that. Just consider before you start saying, no, we don't want to play them again because, it's so hard to beat a team a 3rd time. Like, no, you already beat them twice. So you know what you're doing. Just go out and do the same thing again. So I like that first round matchup against Boise State. This would also mean that in the second round matchup, the most likely, to me, team to win first place at this point is New Mexico. Right? It could. Utah State does still have a path to first place. And I guess Colorado State technically might have a path to first place too, maybe, but it would take a lot because New Mexico has the tiebreaker. They swept Utah State, and so they have a tiebreaker there, and so New Mexico would need to lose 2 games. So New Mexico's the likely number 1 seed. The Aztecs did lose pretty bad in the pit, but they just won in Viejas. Hopefully Magoon-Guath is back by that time, and they just beat New Mexico without Magoon-Guath, so that should only be helpful, hopefully. The other thing that I like about this is the Aztecs tend to play their best game in the tournament in the second game. The first game almost every year is a little bit of a struggle, so that's why I like the thought of playing against a team that you've already beaten twice, because even if it's a struggle, even if it's closer, hopefully you can pull it out again. Then you play against New Mexico, and in the second game, the Aztecs almost always blow out their opponents for like the past 5 years in a row or something like that, maybe even longer. In fact, probably even longer, because even before that, like in Brian Dutcher's first couple of years where Nevada was killing it and they were always the number 1 seed, the Aztecs beat them both times as well when they were like a ranked team. And one of them was they outscored Nevada by like 30 or something. Like they beat them by 30 or 35 or whatever in the second game. And so getting that New Mexico team that is legitimately a very good team in that second game seems like a good way to go. You could make that same argument for Utah State, given how close those games have been, where in Viejas, it took them making basically a buzzer-beating shot to win, and then in Logan, without Magoon-Guath, the Aztecs had a lead with 4 minutes to go. So you could make the same argument, but New Mexico seems like the most likely, so that's where we're sticking with, and I think that's fine. And then the likely opponent at the very end would be Colorado State or Utah State. That's where things would get tricky. The third game, what often happens is both teams are pretty tired. Their legs are worn out, and what often happens is the shooting just goes out the window. Like any jump shots aren't looking good, especially from distance, like especially from 3. It's just hard to make shots from distance. And so that combined with like the style of defense, Utah State becomes a scary matchup at that point with their matchup zone defense. It's definitely something the Aztecs have shown they can score on, and to a certain extent do it without the threat of the deep ball as well. But you don't love that matchup, especially with like how hard they want to run and stuff like that. The Utah State matchup doesn't look great. The Colorado State matchup looks a little bit better because they're probably a little more reliant on the 3-ball than Utah State is, and their defense isn't quite as good to me. At least not in that situation. I guess the metrics say Colorado State's defense is better, but for whatever that's worth. But yeah, like neither of those, like the Aztecs did obliterate Colorado State at home, but then lost on the road, and that was another kind of close game. Both the games against Utah State have been close. I don't know who I would prefer there, honestly. Might have to do a little bit more digging as we get closer to it, but I like the thought of being kind of the 4th or 5th seed, and ideally the 4th seed, just because that means the Aztecs win the next 3 games probably. But that's where to go. The other benefit, and this is a smaller benefit that I do think even maybe sometimes I overblow occasionally, but it's not so small that it isn't worth mentioning, is that if you are the 4th or 5th seed, provided you win your games, the schedule is easier. The 3rd seed has never won a Mountain West Conference tournament. Never. Part of that could be attributed to the schedule because they play the last game every night. So on Thursday night, they're the last game on Thursday. And then on Friday, there's only 2 games, but they're playing that last game, right? And then on Saturday, that game is kind of early. So they have, I always forget what it is, but it's like 15 hours in between the end of their game and the start of the next game. And they still have to do, even when their game ends, they still have to do media availability, go back and shower, try and get some sleep, and then do a walkthrough the next morning before the game. Like, it's just a rough turnaround, and it's not that much different from the earlier game on Friday, right? It's 2.5, 3 hours difference, something like that, right? So, like, it's not that much different, but there is something to, like, the 3 seed has never won. The 2 seed has won as many times as the 1 seed has. And so, you know, them playing the second to last game on Thursday, maybe the cumulative effect isn't as strong. There's also just the 2 seed being better, maybe being more desperate to win, to get in the conference, any number of other potential things that could contribute to it. But you don't, to me, you don't want to be the 3 seed for sure. The 2 seed would be okay, but you still have that later game the night before. So if provided you can win, it's nice to be that 4th or 5th seed because you're playing the second game on Thursday, and then you're playing the first game on Friday if you win, and then you get those extra couple hours, right? And so fourth seed is I think the goal there, and just with the way the matchups seem to be working, it seems like that's genuinely the best path to, and we'll have to see what happens. You know, maybe something happens where Colorado State drops down and they end up being like the 5th seed, and San Diego State ends up being the 3rd seed maybe in that case. I don't know what exactly would happen there. Things can shuffle, but that seems like what's probably going to happen to me if I was a betting man, is those are the top 5, and probably more or less in the current order that it is right now. And maybe it's just the optimism bias in me, but I think it's a somewhat favorable trip, at the very least until the championship game. And the championship game is always just such a crapshoot anyways, that you just take what you can get, I think. But yeah, Aztec Nation, that does it for this one. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time.
On the floor, it's Butler with 2 seconds. He's got to put it up, and he wins it. He wins it with the jumper.
Mitchell's feeling it. Now he's feeling it even more. What it do, Matt Mitchell? Shackle to Flynn for the win. It's good! Oh, Malachi Flynn! On the rim.
2 to go. Butler has
And a steal. Darion Trammell will coast in for the layup.
Franklin with 2 seconds, forces the shot, it's good! The Aztecs advance! They've won it on the shot by the player of the year!
Miller, he put it behind his back, it's taken away by Butler. Lob it up, lob it down! Big finish, Keyshawn Johnson!
Now we have tasted it, we're coming back. We're coming back.